Hey guys, everybody in the US should have access to high quality healthcare. However, one group of people in particular is being excluded from accessing healthcare, and that's the transgender community. Trans people face lots of barriers to accessing gender affirming care, including discrimination and lack of insurance coverage. On top of that, a lot of states are passing bills specifically targeting and restricting the access to healthcare for transgender individuals. So let's talk about healthcare and shed some light on what's actually happening here. Okay, so all I can say is here we go. My guest today is Schuyler Bailar, an educator, author, advocate, and activist who's made history as the first transgender athlete to compete in any sport on the NCAA Division One men's team. He holds a BA from Harvard University in cognitive neuroscience and evolutionary psychology, and is a celebrated inspirational speaker for trans inclusion, body acceptance, and mental health awareness. Today, we're going to take a deep dive into the state of trans healthcare in the United States and explore challenges faced by the transgender community in accessing the care that they need. Hello, Schuyler. How are you?
Hi, Michael. I'm good. I'm good. Thank you so much for having me.
Excellent. I am ready to deep dive into this topic and see where we are. Let's start out right at the beginning. Go ahead. Can you share like your personal journey as a transgender individual and maybe like the challenges you faced in accessing healthcare?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. Well, I think it's hard to just say one thing, right, to give you my history of healthcare, but I'll try to give a couple quick points. So, I learned that I was transgender actually while I was in an eating disorder treatment center. I was really struggling with my mental health, which is why that's something I'm very passionate about talking about. And during that time, I realized I'm transgender, and I realized I also wanted to access gender affirming healthcare, or what some people call transition. And I actually went through a lot of difficulty trying to access that healthcare because many of my providers wouldn't sign off on me being allowed to access that healthcare.
Mm-hmm.
And in order to get gender affirming healthcare, unlike pretty much any other, many other types of healthcare, you have to have a doctor say that this is the right next step for you, that you are mentally sane enough to get this healthcare in order to even get top surgery or get gender affirming hormones. And I couldn't get a doctor to say that I was ready for that.
Yeah.
And so it took me, a long time to access that care.
How old were you, by the way, when you started to make your transition?
Yeah, I was 18, and that's also salient as well because a lot of those bills that you just mentioned are banning children, right? So they're banning children's access who already don't have a lot of agency, a lot of ability to get the care that they need. And even at 18, I struggled to have people believe me.
Yeah. So I'm guessing that your experience with that kind of got you into being an advocate for trans healthcare, or how did that come about?
Yeah, I think being advocate came mostly actually out of being an athlete. So I was the first, as you mentioned, first openly transgender athlete on a D1 men's team.
Mhm.
And that gave me this platform to talk about my experience as a trans person. And that sort of expanded into talking about healthcare, talking about mental health, talking about body acceptance, just sort of liberation in general.
Yeah. And then so, like since you are an advocate, what is the most pressing issue you see surrounding trans healthcare?
I think it's actually not about trans healthcare,
Okay.
and I think that's what people miss is we could go in any one of the silos that are being attacked. We could do healthcare, sports, bathrooms, LGBTQ plus content in schools. We could focus on any one of those and say, oh, it's just about fairness in sport, just about protecting children and gender affirming healthcare, whatever. But the reality is, it's truly about excising transness from public life and really all together. And we've had people move from saying, oh, this is about protecting children, protecting women, to now explicitly saying, let's eradicate transgenderism, quote unquote, an incorrect word, but the concept. Let's eradicate trans people from society. And that's
Mhm.
a direct quote. So, it's not about healthcare. The central issue is actually an attempt to push out trans people altogether, and along with us, every other marginalized person. Right? This actually isn't just about trans people. Even then, you zoom out even further. This is about trying to concentrate power in the hands of people who are not marginalized, in the hands of the people who are cisgender, right? So not trans, white, mostly men, and so on.
I think that it's the law that's coming out, or the laws that are coming out, are pretty much an abomination of anything having to do with like a democratic or any kind of republic society. So it's like ridiculous. Like, let's talk about some of the bills. I think Texas and Florida probably have some of the most
Mhm.
heinous bills coming out right now. What are your thoughts on those bills? And let's talk about those for a second.
Yeah. Texas, Florida, Tennessee with the new drag ban. A lot of these bills are really heinous. So last year we saw the governor incite essentially demand that Child Protective Services investigate any home that had children who had accessed gender affirming healthcare, potentially taking away these children from their families. In Florida, we're seeing the same bills this year, except they're expanded. So we can actually now see them encouraging children to be kidnapped from families where the parents have accessed gender affirming healthcare. The drag bans are even more insidious in some ways because people think it's about drag, which a lot of people sexualize. Of course, drag does not have to actually be sexual, and in many cases is not. But the reason actually it's most harmful is it's not really about drag. Anybody who's not wearing the clothing, quote unquote, whatever that means, that it
Hmm.
assumed to be their assigned gender could be considered to be in drag. So if somebody considers me because I'm assigned female at birth, they might consider me truly female. I would be considered walking in drag by walking just as myself down the street. So those drag bans are even more insidious in that they're just straight up saying we don't want trans people around, right?
Yeah.
So these bills are very harmful.
What's causing the bills? In other words, what is
Mhm.
causing this? I'm going to just say hate
Sure.
against trans people, and why are these bills popping up? What's making that
Yeah.
happen?
So I think there's two facets. There's who's making the bills, right? Who's
Okay.
inciting the fear and doing the attacking, and then who's supporting that. The people who are making them are almost all cis white straight men who are already in power, who are trying to hold their power. Why are they doing that? It's a really great way to push votes. So that kind of puts the second part. The second part is who's supporting the bills. Those are people, actually, I think mostly very well-intentioned people who
Yeah.
their well-intentionedness is being twisted into believing that trans people are the problem. And so that's why I said it's insidious. The word I keep using is insidious. It's tricky, it's deceitful, it's harmful because it makes somebody think that, oh, I want to protect children, I want to protect women, right?
Hmm.
Okay, trans people are harming women. Oh my God, men are going to pretend to be women and hurt my daughter. Yes, let's excise trans people. And the reality is that that's just a trick of the patriarchy, the trick of these people in power to get votes, to get more power. And you can look at it, if we dive into any one of the issues, we could piece that apart.
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the things that you just brought this up, and this is the bathroom issue. Like, people say, okay, I don't want men in the women's bathroom. Talk
Mhm.
about that for a second.
Sure. All right. So the first most important thing is if you don't want men in the women with in the bathroom with women, um, one, trans women are women. We're not talking about
Yes.
men, and that's the first most important thing that we start with is language and making sure we're starting there. The next part is if you're afraid of a man, a cis man in this case, right, a non-trans man. If you're afraid of a man pretending to be a woman in order to gain access to the women's bathroom in order to harm women, who are you afraid of? You are afraid of
As
men
cis men.
and
Right.
cis men specifically. And yes, there are many cis men that have perpetrated harm against lots of people, especially cis women. But we should then punish those cis men, or rather hold those cis men accountable, instead of punishing trans people for the harm that cis men create.
Hmm.
And the important part there is then what's the solution? Teach boys to be better. Let's teach boys about consent. Let's teach boys about accessing their own emotions and not having to demand pleasure from others, right? Or to demand power over others. And I think there's a really important gap that we're missing there that says, oh, we're afraid of men, so punish trans women who are far more likely to be assaulted in bathrooms than ever to perpetuate assault. The most common person to assault a woman, especially a daughter, a child, is actually men in her family already. Men she
Yeah.
already knows, even her biological father. So by that logic, we should ban all cis men from all families, and we don't do that, right?
So- yeah.
So it's again, it's fear mongering. It's a tactic that was started in 2000, I think it was like 2012, with the Hero Bill, and it wasn't even about bathrooms. People said, "Oh, I realize that if I subjugate trans people as the problem, then we can get votes and we can get people to do what we want in the sort of Republican
Yeah.
anti-trans rhetoric instead of believing in this equality, which doesn't harm anybody."
Yeah. I think you brought up, like, this is an amazing point. You're right. It's cis men that are causing the problem. But then you've got women in the bathrooms and they see some woman in there that has a penis, and they're going like, "That's really just a cis man." How do we get that
Mm.
changed in people's heads?
Yeah. Yeah. So that's a big conversation that I've seen recently. And the first thing is that I think it's very uncommon for trans people to be naked in bathrooms. We are far more afraid of being naked in the bathrooms than anybody is of us. And I can guarantee you that. Like, I don't even need data for that one.
Yeah.
I'm sure there is some data, but the data is that trans people are more likely to be assaulted in bathrooms than to perpetuate assault. But, anyways, that's the first thing, is that it's just not like this whole image of like, a woman with a penis walking around the bathroom naked. It's just, I cannot tell you how uncommon that is.
Yes.
Does it happen? Sure, maybe, but very uncommon. The second thing is, if you are more concerned about somebody else's genitalia than whatever it is you're doing in the bathroom, that is a you problem.
Yep.
You can have pain, you can have fright, you can have discomfort, but that is for you to deal with. And the
Gotcha.
best example I can give is that if somebody, let's say a particular type of human, and we could even make it about race, right? A particular race of human has harmed me in my past. I might develop a fear of that kind of person, right? I might develop a fear of all people who look like that person. I might frighten on the street because I see somebody who looks like my assailant. That does not mean that that person or all people from that background, that race or whatever, should be banned from walking down the street. It means I have stuff to deal with. And it
Yep.
doesn't make my pain or my how I was harmed any less valid. It's very valid to have that pain, but I have to deal with it. And I
Thank
don't need
you.
to ban other people who look like people who hurt me.
I will tell you that living in whatever city you want to live in, just being a black man walking on the street, you can sometimes see people just, I'm going to cross the street just
Mm,
because of this. And it's, yeah, there is a lot of discomfort, hate, and unrest in the country. And
absolutely.
yeah, let's go back to kids for a second.
Sure.
Um, and it's still on this idea of who can transition when.
Mm,
One of the things people talk about with healthcare is kids are too young to make the decisions themselves, and a lot of kids know when they are young that they are trans,
mhm,
they are not cis.
mhm.
When should kids themselves be able to make these decisions, or how does that whole thing play out? That's
Yeah.
where
All
a
right.
lot
So
of
number
questions.
one, being trans is not a decision. Telling somebody that you're trans is a decision, and
Sorry,
that's
I
really
made that
important.
mistake with the words.
Sure. No, I didn't hear a mistake that you made, but for anybody listening, right? Being trans is not a decision. Telling somebody that you're trans could be, right?
Okay.
Sometimes it's not a decision. It's taken from you, right? Some people are outed, and that's a problem with the bills. They're forced outing, so it's not a decision. But anyways, being trans is not a decision or a choice. It's just something that we are. We choose to tell people.
Mhm.
Um, when should kids be allowed to make decisions about their transitions or about their gender affirmation journeys? So I'm not a medical expert, but I can parrot what the medical experts have said. And gender affirming care is age appropriate. Different gender affirming care sort of tools are provided at different ages, and I think that's also key. A lot of people say we don't want to be cutting off the genitals of children. We are not cutting off the genitals of children. That is not a common procedure at all, period, but especially not for children. And children are not getting surgery until maybe their teens,
Mhm.
mostly after 18, because most surgeons will not provide gender affirming healthcare, sorry, gender affirming surgery specifically before 18 in any state. Doesn't matter where
Mhm.
you are. So kids, gender affirming healthcare, when should they get it? At any time. It just, what it constitutes is different at different ages.
Does that include, I know there's a lot of people talk about, okay, forget surgery. What about puberty blockers?
Yeah. Yeah. So puberty blockers have been used on cisgender kids, kids who are not trans, for decades without problems, because they're not problematic. And nobody, you've probably never seen a whole, 129 anti-puberty blocker brigades around the country that stops cisgender kids with precocious puberty from taking puberty blockers because there's no problem with them. The only, pushback has come when trans kids have started using them. Puberty
Okay.
blockers are reversible. You take them out, and natal puberty, the puberty that would happen without them, will ensue. There have been some arguments about small problems that people think happen because of puberty blockers, but actually recent research has shown that those are actually not a result of the blockers. It's a result of transphobia and not being allowed to participate in sports, not being able
Gotcha.
to move one's body.
If you could actually get in front of any of these senators who are writing these bills
Mhm.
and presenting them to the public and to their constituents and to their other people, like if you could sit face to face and just have a discussion with them, what would you say? What would you ask them?
That's a great question. And the problem with, I mean, what I would want to say is something about, their humanity actually, and asking them to dive a little bit more into who they are, because that's really the problem. Is that a lot of it is repressed, uninvited, unexplored humanity of their own selves that makes
Hmm.
them think that other people threaten their own humanity. But
Yeah.
lots of them aren't going to have that conversation with me.
That's that's like the problem. I mean, they're not
Mhm.
having the conversation. It's not out being spoken about. So how do we get people to have those conversations? Sure, we can be on shows like this, but will the people who need to actually watch what you're saying be watching?
Yeah.
Um,
I don't know, and that's why I try to do the work that I do is in as many arenas as I possibly can, and I think that what I've seen to be the most powerful is witness, is testimony of transness. And when we sit in front of a trans person and say, "Hi, I see you for who you are," you might not agree with every single thing somebody says, but you might actually witness them as a human. And
yeah,
most people say, some 60 something percent of Americans say they've never met a trans person, and yet everybody is legislating on where we belong, but they haven't even met us.
yes,
It's this ethereal concept of twisted, propagandized non-facts, disinformation, lies, right, about us. And if you actually sit in front of a trans child, I spent so much time with they're children. They are
yeah,
6-year-old children who are just running around trying to be kids. And this is what America's afraid of. And if you
yeah,
met them, right, if most of middle America, especially the people voting, in support of these anti-trans bills, who think that it's the right thing, if you met those children and you realize that you were taking them away from their rights, I think there would be a shift. And I've watched it happen too. I've watched people change in front of me because they've seen my humanity and they're like, wait a second, I connect to you. You're a real person. Oh,
hmm,
I don't want you
yep,
to not be able to play the sport that you love. I don't want you to not be able to have health care, right? It's about that witnessing, but it's hard to present that to people.
I agree. What can allies do to help? I mean, like, yeah, we can do the show, but what can other people do day to day?
Yeah. Well, I have workshops called Allyship in Action, and it's all
Okay.
about what you can do day to day. The most recent one is actually tonight, so I'm going to be giving a workshop called Transaction. But I think the first and the easiest thing to do is to follow trans people who are trans educators online, because everybody these days is online. Click a follow button; it's super easy for you to do, and read what we say. Listen to what we say. It doesn't have to be me; it can be me if you want.
Mhm.
But listening to what we're saying about our testimony, about who we are, I think is the simplest way to inject transness into your life every day, right? To
Absolutely.
expose yourself to that, and realize that there's more to the world than being cisgender.
Yeah. Like what role could say media play in helping raise awareness about pushing
Mm,
trans healthcare and just trans in general? What do you think could
yeah.
happen?
I think we're moving in a direction where there's more accurate and diverse, therefore accurate, right?
Okay.
Representations of transness. I think that is a huge step forwards, but I think it's going to take time until it is no longer or far reduced in its sort of amount of stereotyping, right?
Yeah.
Of tokenizing us. Because I still, by the way, I don't watch a whole lot of TV that includes trans people, because it makes me uncomfortable. A lot of it is not done in a way that makes me want to see that makes me see myself. So it's on its way, but we're not quite there yet.
Okay. Like what are some like other resources? You've got your TikTok, you've got your channels, but what are some other resources that people can get to and learn about
Yeah,
transness?
well, yeah, so I have my resources. I also have an online video learning series called Lane Changer,
Hmm.
and that is a gender literacy learning series, a video series. You can take it on your computer at home, wherever you are. It's easy to do. There's also the ACLU bill tracker. So if you Google ACLU
Yes.
legislative bills, it tracks all of the anti-LGBTQ plus bills around the country, which is a bit depressing, to be quite honest with you. But what you can do, if you would like to take your allyship a step further, is go figure out what bills are in your state and then call the representatives that have the ability to vote on those and tell them to vote no. They're supposed to listen to you. They are supposed to represent you. And we actually do have power. We've seen, I've run campaigns online to help people send emails or make phone calls. And we've actually had bills vetoed by governors that had a lot of input from the public.
Yeah, one thing I think people in general need to reassert and relearn is that the fact that we have representatives and not leaders, and that word choice is really disturbing to me. And so when people say, "Oh, I need to call my leaders in Congress," I'm like, no, you need to call your representative in Congress and make
Mhm.
them remember that,
Yeah,
you know?
100%.
So, I want to do something a little different. We're going to do something I do on the show called This or That. And this or that basically is I'm going to give you a question that's got two choices. You can pick one or the other. You can't pick neither, and you can't pick both.
Okay.
It comes out to be hard for some people, but we can let you justify your answer if you want to. So,
All right. Sounds good. I'm ready.
okay, advocacy focus, trans healthcare awareness, or fighting against discriminatory legislation.
Mm. I do the former, I
Okay.
think. Yeah, trans healthcare awareness. But I would say that I do just like general trans awareness, not specifically healthcare. But yeah, probably would do more of the awareness because that's the educational piece than the policy piece.
Okay. Public opinion, dispelling myths about trans healthcare, or promoting positive stories of trans joy.
Definitely the former, though the second one is a big passion of mine. But I do the first one far more.
Okay. Media representation, documentaries on trans issues, or fictional stories featuring trans characters.
What do I want more of?
Yeah, however you interpret that.
Can you say it one more time?
Okay, so documentaries on trans issues,
Mm.
or fictional stories featuring trans characters.
Fictional stories is what I want more of. I want us to be in novels and movies and books. The documentaries are great, but I want more of the including transness in everything as opposed to specifically trans docs.
Awesome. Caden, hope you're paying attention to that. Caden's watching right now. Allies in healthcare. Do we want cis medical professionals advocating for trans care, or trans individuals sharing their experiences?
Oh darn! I thought you were going to say trans doctors instead.
Actually, just go ahead and
Um,
change it to that, to trans doctors.
I want more trans doctors.
Okay. More trans doctors. How about funding, government supported trans healthcare, or private donations and organizations?
That's definitely both. But you said I can't say both, so
That is
um,
a both.
yeah,
Which
I
one do
don't
we
know.
need
That
more of
one's
right now?
what do we need more of right now? I don't know. I think probably the government one, but I don't know. That one's a tough one.
Okay. I think you might be right on the government, but yeah, we've got to get people supporting also, right?
We
Just
need
on their
people
own.
supporting also, but I think the people and I think it's great to tax the rich in that case and have the donors be able to donate. But I think the government needs to step up as well,
Okay.
and the government is more of a systemic change.
Yes. Youth support. We got early intervention and guidance, or waiting until adulthood for a medical transition.
Definitely early intervention and guidance because it doesn't mean the kid has to transition. It just means giving them the resources, the language, the access to community. I think it's life saving to do that earlier. Actually, it's not a think. I know from the research we there's research that supports what I just said.
Okay. I got one more, and then I've got an extra question for you.
Okay.
Okay. Medical training, specialized trans healthcare programs, or incorporating trans health into general medical education.
Definitely the latter. The former is important, and I think we should have that too. But incorporating trans healthcare into general medical education is huge. There's so many medical schools that don't have any information about transness, and I think that's really detrimental, not only to trans people but also to cis people, because there's a lot more expansiveness to gender than
Yep.
people understand.
All right. Here's a fun question for you. If you were a superhero, what would your superpower be, and how would you use it to tackle the challenges trans people face in healthcare?
Okay. Well, my selfish superpower is that I wish I could breathe underwater. That
That's a
doesn't help
good one.
anybody. That only helps me be more peaceful. But if I had a superpower, that one's tough. I mean, I'm a very like realistic sort of logical person, so it's tough for me to think outside the box in that sense. I think the first thing I thought of is my superpower would be getting all um, cis men specifically to learn how to safely feel safe in expressing their emotions. I think
Okay.
that could change the world if all, especially cis men, but all cis people could safely express their emotions, could be in touch with their emotions, could manage their emotions, and express them to each other. I think we'd have a really, really different world, a really much more beautiful one.
Do you know, I think that as a superpower, you're probably already working on that with the psychology that you do. And just, I don't think that's like so much to ask, right?
Well, you know what? That's why I said I don't like coming up with things that aren't realistic. So that is as
Yeah,
realistic of a superpower as I could give you.
I think it's
Um,
good. Oh gosh. Schuyler, we need people to stay in touch with you, learn from you. Definitely, you got your lanechanger.com, and that's you talked a little bit about that with your general literacy and learning series. And definitely, as long as TikTok is still around, and we've got Instagram, we're at Pink Manta Ray, and it has just been awesome. I'm gonna leave that on the screen because I actually follow you on both platforms, and I really appreciate it. So
Thank you.
you are awesome. Let's keep it going, and let's get some more people involved.
Thanks so much, Michael. I
Thanks for
appreciate your
being
time.
on. I
Thanks
really
for having
appreciate you.
me. Thank you.